slides and a lot more information, and unfortunately I'm going to have to talk fast because there's so much. And even trimming down the information. So the topic is who's in control of your mind. I'm going to do a brief overview on some of the subconscious mind and overcoming the indoctrinated brain. So this, I'm working this right. Down button. Down.
The arrow that looks like it's going forward.
So towards the top. Sorry, short instruction here. Moving it here, that's not It's moving it on my screen, but not up there. Oh, it's moving, but it's not moving up here.
Change the batteries.
Okay, I did a short disclaimer on this. You know the drill. Hey, this is for informational, educational purposes only, etc. You should always consult a healthcare professional before you make any changes. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of good information. So what's going on in our society today? Have you noticed some of these things that are going on? It's like critical thinking.
We can't hear you. You need to.
Oh, you can't hear me?
It's louder. Make an adjustment in it. That's good.
Critical thinking seems to be more rare than common. You have somebody has a question, and it's like they don't have that ability to think about it and really think it through. Instead, they just, respond with this dogma for an answer. And some people actually are accepting lies that are obvious to us, but they're not even questioning. So, in this book, Dr. Mills, The Indoctrinated Brain, gives us a whole lot of clues as far as what's going on with that. So, he's been researching the brain and immunology for years. Particularly, he was interested in Alzheimer's. And he observed the following, that COVID was, my words were, perfect storm, because all these multiple conditions came together to make it the worst it could be. And there were biological changes that happened that were brought on by the spike protein, and it impacted both the body and the brain. Psychological, there were psychological attacks in his evaluation, and so like this, this fear mongering, all this peer pressure, etc., social engineering, and so these changes altogether actually make people more susceptible to accepting indoctrination. So if it was a perfect storm, then he had the question in his mind. He didn't really want to ask this question for himself. Was this a coincidence, or was it intended to create maximum damage? So let me read this to you. This is a quote from him. At first I was reluctant to entertain this thought because it had such far-reaching consequences for the interpretation of our present time. So his conclusions after considering it all, he said, probability that it was just coincidental, 0%, that it was 100% planned, and is frightening. He actually said frightening because he didn't even want to consider it. Remember, he was like, don't even want to go there. That it was a planned, physical, and psychological attack. So, the question becomes, what was the most powerful tool used against us? So, how many people think that was a biological tool? How many people think that it was a physiological or a psychological tool? They were both used, and it does one impact. It was psychological. He says, in his estimation, the most powerful tool was the methods, and actually also caused physical damage. So what was that tool? Fear. So let's quickly talk about fear. So we all know about the fight or flight. We just had Dr. Eating mentioned that. So so there can be different levels of fear also. So there can be the stress level, the anxiety, but it gets us in that mode where our heart rate is running faster, our digestive system shuts down because we're ready to run or fight. So what are some of the common causes of fear? Excuse me. Common causes of fear. So actually, one of the things, I thought this was interesting, bite cope. So what happens when somebody goes in to have their blood pressure taken and, check their heart rate? They can be up because of that fight or flight mode. So if it's extreme, it actually can become a phobia and can trigger almost anything. Whatever is set up as that trigger. So it could be spiders, snakes, etc., heights, thunder. So how many people in America, even just before, how many people were affected by that, where they're just automatically having these responses? For adults, 12%. So that means in a room of 100 people, 12 of those people are likely to have some kind of phobia. And in children and adults, it's even worse. It's 19%. So let's take a quick look. Dr. Carolyn Leaf is a learning expert, a psychologist. So she has compared our thought process to our memory to leaves in the tree. So the neurons being the leaves. So an experience triggers that. So it sends out like this breeze through the neurons, and it goes around and searches for something related to that experience. Then it comes back to the front. So that's the first step. The second step is like, hey, we have this information, let's make a decision on it, right? Is it something, hey, we're going to have that fight or flight, or are things safe, and let's move forward. So in the case of where there's a fear factor, so there could be all these consequences. It goes around, it collects that information, what was that past experience, and it will actually skip that second step of the logic in making a critical decision. So where do we really start with the subconscious? We talked a little bit, Dr. Dean did, with the kind of like the programming of where we're at. So it starts when we're actually at conception. And so there's a state of consciousness and unawareness, which is a subconscious. So when we're first conceived and on up through our 7th year, or maybe a little bit before, we're just receiving everything and recording it all, the sensations. And after that point, those recordings start playing, and we might not even be okay. So then, if we look at what Dr. Lipton has said about that we're running that program, and we're not even aware of it. So he has some methods as far as recognizing that, affirmations, etc. Some methods to address that. Dr. Lee has some also some methods as far as, hey, you have a negative thought, like, hey, I failed math. test last time. Just embrace that, acknowledge that you have that fear, and then put that back on the shelf, so to speak. It's going to be different this time. It's going to be different this time. Put that thought back on the shelf. She also has some brain mapping, etc. I can attest to the fact that that second step of looking at embracing and acknowledging, and then putting it back with a positive statement actually works. I used to have a phobia. I was told that you could overcome phobias, but I didn't. So here's what's happening as far as what's happening with our critical thinking. And it's actually our individuality as well as our critical thinking that's being attacked. So, according to Dr. Nelson, he's in Germany. So his thing is, hey, it looks like only 25% of people today are able to do critical thinking. And why is that? And 75% have little or no critical thinking that's going on. So the fact is that you are, if you are curious, you're obviously curious, you're here, his audience, as he assumes, is going ahead and you're at the, you're having some healthy brain function. And so there are some things as far as the damage to the brain that were combined from the methods of psychological and biological. So basically it attacked our immune system, the biological side, and then it went through, attacked the blood-brain barrier, and then it triggered an immune system in our brain, which caused inflammation, cytokine storm, etc., especially the hippocampus, which is where our thoughts and memories occur. So a lot of things happen as far as, some of the signs, lack of purpose, lack of individuality, lockdowns causing isolation. Here's a chart. We obviously don't have enough time to go through every little step of it. Unfortunately, this is being recorded. But basically, your hippocampus is like a memory drive, a thumb drive, where you have that current memory, and then at night, it downloads that information into long-term memory and the neocortex. And so the index neurons are lining it up as far as finding out where and when those memories are stored. So then when we treat it, we're using those index memories. Now the hippocampus actually works with two, and the one where there's a memory where there's something interesting about it, your brain registers that. If it's something just rudimentary, it doesn't, it skips over that. So what happens if there's damage to the hippocampus? So what can happen is that there's a problem, because the hippocampus is not creating those new neurons for storing that memory. If there's not enough neurons, we call them indexing neurons, there's not enough of those, the memory cannot be downloaded and up over to long-term memory. And he says that's how we get into a zombie state. So here are some signs of reduced neuron, index neurons, depression, psychological resilience, which is reduced, fear of making changes, or lack of willpower, inability to concentrate and solve complex problems, and loss of memory. So the average American hippocampus actually shrinks 1 to 4%, but in healthy cultures it actually grows 1 to 3% annually. So he has a formula, anti-indoctrinational formula. And it's like, curiosity. And you're able and willing to think deeply. And willingness to do something about the situation. That's why he's glad that people are listening to the message, because that shows that they have some things to do. They can do this. So his strategies for prevention and repair, you have to have a purpose in life. You have to have a social life, so you're keeping those memories generating. And he does have some recommendations for the nutrients. And exercise, sleep, and time, we all do those things. But they are extremely important for us to maintain our health neurologically, for our memory to work. So take time in life. Don't get chronic stress. Create chronic stress for yourself by overscheduling more than what is really feasible. So what can we do? He answers how and why in this book. How was the empathy, how was empathy actually turned against us and weaponized against us? And how can a society turn psychopathic? And why was fear leveraged against us? And why do people change, or want to change, but they lack the willpower? And who is behind this and why? So, why did Dr. Mill say that we are in a knowledge war? And why did he say we can win it? He actually has some answers in his book. Unfortunately, in 15 minutes, you can't cover it all, but you can at least get an introduction and get some guidelines as far as where you can start looking for some answers. Thank you very much.